In the dead of a cold February night, a storm was brewing, not in the skies, but in the heart of a man trained for war. Mitch Ruble, Vietnam vet, sharpshooter, and a ticking time bomb fueled by rage. A decorated soldier turned rogue deputy, his grip on justice twisted by bitterness and betrayal. Then, silence shattered by a single deafening blast. Pellets tearing through glass, slicing through the calm of a quiet home. Behind that shattered window, a man stood in the crosshairs of a deadly vendetta. Joe Clark, a lawman with a mission, now caught in a sniper's deadly game. Despair crashed in like the storm, trust shattered, a community shaken, and a killer vanished into the night. This was no random act. This was war at home. And the hunt for justice had just begun. Before you continue this journey with us, I want to ask, where are you watching from right now? Whether you're listening from Ohio, from across the country, or somewhere else in the world, this story matters because it could happen anywhere. Small-town violence. Betrayal within the badge. Justice delayed but not denied. If stories like this resonate with you, true crime that goes deeper than just the headlines, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. We bring you the cases that demand to be told, the investigations that refuse to be forgotten. Hit that subscribe button right now. Let's continue. Picture this. A modest ranch home sits at the edge of a quiet residential street. Inside, warm light spills from the kitchen window into the February darkness. The hum of a television carries from the living room, a Friday night basketball game. Patricia Clark is in the living room, half watching the game, half thinking about the weekend ahead. In the kitchen, Lieutenant Joe Clark stands at the counter. Maybe he's making coffee. Maybe he's reviewing paperwork. The fluorescent light above casts everything in that familiar, comfortable glow of home. The place where a lawman finally gets to take off his badge and just be a husband. Outside, 31 feet away, hidden behind the thick trunk of a tree, someone is watching. Waiting. The February cold bites at exposed skin. Breath creates small clouds in the darkness. Gloved hands grip a weapon, not just any weapon, but a rare law enforcement-style shotgun loaded with No. 4 buckshot. The kind of ammunition most people have never heard of. The kind of ammunition that requires training, knowledge, precision. The shooter's eye traces the sight line. Through branches. Past the darkness. Through that plate glass window. To the man standing in his own kitchen, completely unaware that 33 feet separates him from eternity. One pull of the trigger. That's all it takes. The sound. Not the crack of a rifle. Not the pop of a pistol. A thunderous boom that tears through the quiet Friday night like an explosion. Inside the house, Patricia doesn't hear a gunshot. She hears what sounds like a light bulb bursting. A sharp, violent pop followed by the cascade of breaking glass. Joe. Silence. Joe. When she rushes into the kitchen, the scene that greets her will haunt her for the rest of her life. The window, shattered. Glass everywhere, glittering like cruel diamonds across the linoleum. And Joe. Lieutenant Joe Clark. Her husband. The man who dedicated his life to protecting Washington County. Lying motionless on the floor, his blood mixing with the shattered glass. The explosion had come. But this wasn't a malfunction. This wasn't an accident. This was murder. 911 calls flood in. Sirens pierce the February night. The Washington County Sheriff's Department descends on the Clark residence. These aren't just investigators arriving at a crime scene. These are brothers in arms discovering one of their own has been cut down. In his home. In his kitchen. While his wife watched television in the next room. The scene tells a chilling story. A single shell casing outside, near the tree. No. 4 buckshot. Not your typical ammunition. Not something you pick up at the local sporting goods store. This is specialized. This is what law enforcement uses. Tire tracks in the soft earth nearby. Deep impressions suggesting a quick getaway. Neighbors report seeing a blue Ford Pinto parked on the street earlier that evening. It's gone now, vanished into the Ohio night like smoke. And then there's the shot itself. The investigators reconstruct the trajectory. 31 feet. Through glass. In darkness. A single, fatal blast that struck with surgical precision. This wasn't spray and pray. This wasn't a panicked shooting. This was calculated. Professional. Almost military. This was a hit, someone whispers. The word spreads through the department like wildfire. Not a robbery. Not a domestic dispute. A hit. An execution. But who would want Lieutenant Joe Clark to add? The answer seems obvious. Tragically, terrifyingly obvious. That very morning, a local newspaper had published an interview with Joe Clark. The headline might as well have been painted in neon. Lieutenant vows to name names in county drug epidemic. Joe Clark wasn't just a cop. He was a crusader. In 1981, Washington County, like much of rural Ohio, was watching drugs seep into its communities like poison into groundwater. Marijuana. Pills. Harder stuff creeping in from the cities. And Joe Clark had made it his mission to stop it. In the interview, he'd been bold. Uncompromising. He promised to expose the dealers. To name the suppliers. To bring down the whole rotten network, no matter who got burned in the process. We're going to clean up this county, he'd said. And I don't care whose toes I step on. 8 hours later, he was dead. The math was simple. Too simple. Clark threatens to expose drug dealers. Clark gets killed. Drug dealers send a message. 3 days later, the drug theory explodes into terrifying life. A trailer park on the outskirts of town. Another shooting. Another law enforcement officer targeted. The bullet misses, but the message is clear. Someone is at war with the Washington County Sheriff's Department. Task forces are formed. Federal agencies get involved. Every known dealer, every petty criminal with a grudge, every whisper from the street gets followed up. The investigation becomes a sprawling, desperate manhunt. But the trail grows cold. Months pass. Then years. The blue Ford Pinto is never found. The number 4 buckshot leads nowhere. The drug dealers, interrogated, investigated, surveilled, all come up clean. Or at least, clean of this particular murder. By the mid-1980s, the file on Joe Clark's murder has grown thick with dead ends and false starts. Eventually, reluctantly, it's moved to the cold case archives. Another unsolved murder. Another family left without justice. Another cop killer who got away. Patricia Clark is left with nothing but questions and grief. The community moves on, as communities do, though the shadow of that February night never quite lifts. The explosion that killed Joe Clark echoes into silence. But echoes have a way of returning. 30 years later. 3 decades of silence. 3 decades of Patricia Clark waking up every day knowing that somewhere, the person who murdered her husband, who stood in the darkness outside their home and ended his life with a single blast, was walking free. Maybe living in the next county. Maybe having breakfast at the same diner. Maybe still in law enforcement somewhere else, carrying a badge with blood on his hands. 30 years of investigators retiring, case files gathering dust, witnesses' memories fading like old photographs left in the sun. But here's what doesn't fade: justice. Not when the right people refuse to let it. In 2011, at the Washington County Sheriff's Department, a new unit forms. Not flashy. Not well-funded. Just a handful of dedicated investigators given one mandate: solve the unsolvable. The Cold Case Unit. And high on their priority list, literally and emotionally, is the murder of Lieutenant Joe Clark. These new investigators come to the case with fresh eyes and new technology. What they have that their predecessors didn't: time, distance, and a revolutionary tool: the Bureau of Criminal Investigation's 3D crime scene reconstruction system. They scan the Clark residence. They input every measurement, every angle, every detail from the original case file. And slowly, painstakingly, the crime scene rebuilds itself in digital space. The kitchen, the window, the tree, the trajectory of that single, fatal blast. And suddenly, something becomes crystal clear. This wasn't a drug dealer, one investigator says, staring at the screen. Look at this shot. The reconstruction reveals what gut instinct had always whispered, but evidence had never confirmed. This was a sniper-type killing. Think about what that means. In the darkness, from 31 feet away, firing through glass, which can deflect a shot by inches, the shooter had placed a blast with deadly accuracy. No spray. No panic. One shot. One kill. This requires training. Real training. Military training. Drug dealers don't shoot like this. Drug dealers are sloppy, emotional, imprecise. They use handguns in close quarters. They empty entire magazines and miss half their shots. This was surgical. We've been looking in the wrong direction for 30 years, the lead investigator realizes. This wasn't about drugs. This was personal. So they start over. Completely over. They dive into Joe Clark's history, but this time, they're not looking for who he arrested. They're looking for who he fired. Who he disciplined. Who he humiliated. Who had Joe Clark destroyed. The answer lies not in the streets, but within the department itself. Mitchell Ruble, the soldier who never came home. His name appears in the old files like a ghost. Mitch Ruble. Former deputy. Washington County Sheriff's Department. Hired in the late 1970s. Discharged 1980. On paper, Mitch Ruble looked like the perfect cop. Vietnam veteran, not just a vet, but a decorated soldier. He'd served his country in one of America's ugliest wars. He'd seen combat. He developed skills that most people only see in movies. Marksmanship. Tactical thinking. The ability to stay calm when violence erupted around him. He was also, according to those who knew him, a gun fanatic. His collection was extensive, specialized, almost obsessive. He didn't just own firearms, he studied them. He maintained them. He lobbied the department to adopt specific ammunition types for specific tactical situations, including number 4 buckshot. When Ruble joined the sheriff's department, it seemed like a natural fit. A warrior finding new purpose in protecting his community. But somewhere between Vietnam and Washington County, something had broken inside Mitchell Ruble. Maybe it was always broken. Maybe the war just revealed it. The Matt Bonner incident was the case that ends Ruble's law enforcement career, and investigators now believe, lights the fuse that explodes in Joe Clark's kitchen. Matt Bonner, a suspect in a minor case. Details are murky, but what's clear is that Deputy Ruble's interaction with Bonner crosses lines. Serious lines. Allegations of abuse surface. An internal investigation begins. And who's leading that investigation? Lieutenant Joe Clark. Clark is thorough. Clark is uncompromising. Clark doesn't care that Ruble is a fellow officer, a veteran, a brother in blue. When the evidence points to misconduct, Clark recommends termination. Mitch Ruble is fired. For a man who defined himself by service, first to his country, then to his county, this is more than unemployment. This is identity death. This is betrayal. And Mitchell Ruble, trained by the United States military to eliminate threats with precision and prejudice, now has a target. Joe Clark. The cold case unit digs deeper into Ruble's background. They interview former colleagues. Paint a picture of a man whose intensity made people uncomfortable. Who talked about Vietnam too much. Who cleaned his firearms in the department break room. Who saw enemies everywhere. He never really left the jungle, one retired deputy says. He was always at war, even here. They find the complaints. Minor at first, excessive force during a traffic stop. Aggressive behavior with suspects. A hair-trigger temper masked by military discipline. Then the Matt Bonner incident. Then termination. Then silence. After February 1981, Mitchell Ruble disappears from Washington County. No forwarding address. No contact with former colleagues. He becomes a ghost. But ghosts leave traces. Remember that blue Ford Pinto? The one witnesses saw parked near the Clark residence on the night of the murder? The one that vanished into the February darkness? The cold case unit pulls Ruble's old DMV records. And there it is, like finding a puzzle piece that's been missing for 3 decades. Mitchell Ruble owned a blue Ford Pinto in February 1981. The circumstantial case is building. Motive, revenge for termination. Means, military training and firearms expertise. Opportunity, knowledge of Clark's home and habits from his time in the department. Vehicle, matching witness descriptions. But circumstantial doesn't close cases. Circumstantial doesn't bring justice. For that, they need evidence. They need a witness. They need a confession. Or they need the weapon. What they need is what they've been missing for 30 years. A crack in Mitch Ruble's armor. A weakness. A mistake. They're about to find it in the form of a man who's been lying for 3 decades and can't carry the weight anymore. HI's name is Todd Smith. For 30 years, this name has appeared in the case file as Mitchell Ruble's alibi. When early investigators briefly looked at Ruble as a potential suspect, before the drug angle consumed everything, Todd Smith provided a simple, solid alibi. Mitch was with me that night. We were together. He couldn't have been at the Clark residence. Case closed. Or so it seemed. Now, in 2011, the cold case unit comes knocking on Todd Smith's door again. Older now. Living a quiet life. Still in Ohio. Still carrying a secret that's been eating him alive for 3 decades. The interview starts routine. Standard questions. Review of his original statement. But the investigators have learned something in 30 years. People change. Guilt accumulates. And sometimes, all someone needs is permission to tell the truth. 4 hours. That's how long the interrogation lasts. 4 hours of gentle pressure, strategic silence, and carefully worded questions designed to find the cracks in a decades-old lie. Todd, we know Mitch Ruble killed Joe Clark. We know you helped him. We know you've been lying. And we know you're tired of lying. At first, Smith holds firm. The story hasn't changed. They were together. Mitch couldn't have done it. He doesn't know anything about a blue Ford Pinto or a shotgun or a February night that changed everything. But then, something shifts. Maybe it's exhaustion. Maybe it's conscience. Maybe it's the weight of 30 years of looking over his shoulder, wondering when the knock would come, when the lie would finally collapse. If I tell you the truth. Smith's voice is barely a whisper. Can you protect me? The room goes still. Protect you from what, Todd? From Mitch. And like a dam crumbling, Todd Smith's story pours out. Yes, he'd lied. Yes, Mitch Ruble was the killer. And yes, Todd Smith had been there, not as a witness to the shooting, but as the getaway driver. February 1981. Smith picks up Ruble in the blue Ford Pinto. Ruble is quiet, focused, carrying a long case that Smith knows contains a shotgun. They drive to the Clark residence. Smith parks on the street, engine running. Ruble gets out, moves into the darkness, disappears behind the tree line. Smith waits. Minutes that feel like hours. The cold seeping into the car. The radio playing softly. Normal life happening all around while 31 feet away, murder is being planned in the darkness. Then, the explosion. The sound that tears through the quiet. The sound that Smith will hear in his nightmares for 30 years. Ruble sprinting back to the car. Drive. 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 They don't speak. Smith drives. away from the neighborhood, away from the sirens that will soon fill the February night. Eventually, Ruble tells him to stop. He gets out with the shotgun case. Says something Smith doesn't quite hear. Then he's gone. Smith drives home. Tells himself he didn't see what he saw, didn't do what he did. And when the investigators come asking questions, he provides the alibi. Because saying no to Mitchell Ruble, trained killer, Vietnam veteran, man who just executed a cop in cold blood, isn't really an option. I've been terrified for 30 years, Smith says. I thought every day might be the day Mitch decided I knew too much. That I'd end up like Joe Clark. A story on the evening news. A cold case that never gets solved. The investigators make a deal. Protection in exchange for testimony. Todd Smith's statement is the breakthrough they needed. But it's still not enough. Without physical evidence, without the murder weapon, a defense attorney will tear apart a scared accomplice's 30-year-old memory. They need the shotgun. Which means they need to find it. Where do you hide a murder weapon for 3 decades? The obvious answer, you don't keep it. You destroy it. Melt it down. Throw it in a river. Bury it in some remote woods where it will rust into nothing. But Mitchell Ruble isn't obvious. Mitchell Ruble is a gun fanatic. And this wasn't just any weapon. This was a rare law enforcement-style shotgun. This was a collector's piece. The cold case unit starts with Ruble's known associates. They build a web, military buddies from Vietnam, fellow gun enthusiasts, anyone Ruble trusted enough to store something this dangerous, this valuable. The search is exhaustive, tedious, often frustrating. Dead ends pile up. False leads consume weeks. But then, a name surfaces, an Air Force buddy. Someone Ruble served with overseas. Someone who stayed in touch through the years. Someone who attended a military reunion near Columbus, Ohio, in 2013. The investigators show up at the reunion unannounced. Veterans swapping stories, showing off memorabilia, displaying pieces of military history. And there, in a small display case marked Vietnam-era law enforcement firearms. A rare, law enforcement-style shotgun. The exact model. The exact specifications. The weapon that fired number 4 buckshot through a plate glass window on a February night in 1981. Where did you get this? An investigator asks, trying to keep his voice casual. Old buddy of mine. Mitch Ruble. Said he didn't have room for it anymore. Asked if I'd keep it safe. The veteran smiles, proud of his collection. It's a beauty, isn't it? It's the needle in a haystack. The smoking gun. The piece of evidence that turns a cold case into a prosecutable murder. Forensic testing confirms what they already know. This is the weapon. Ballistics match the shell casing found at the scene. The ammunition type matches Ruble's known lobbying within the department. 33 years after Lieutenant Joe Clark was murdered in his own kitchen, the case against Mitchell Ruble is complete. The moment carries the weight of 3 decades. Mitchell Ruble, older now, grayer, still carrying himself with that military bearing, is taken into custody. He doesn't resist. Doesn't show much emotion at all. In his mind, perhaps, this is just another battlefield. Another war. Maybe he always knew this day would come. For Patricia Clark, watching from the courthouse steps as the man who murdered her husband is finally held accountable, the emotions are overwhelming. Relief. Grief. Anger. Validation. 33 years of wondering if justice would ever come. 33 years of seeing her husband's killer walk free. It's over. But it's also not over. Because murder doesn't just end with arrests and convictions. Murder ripples outward forever, touching lives, shattering families, breaking communities in ways that never fully heal. The prosecution's case is methodical, overwhelming, devastating. They present Todd Smith, who testifies to his role in the murder and Ruble's meticulous planning. They present the shotgun, recovered from a military reunion like a ghost returning from the past. They present the ballistics evidence, the vehicle records, the motive, all of it pointing to one inescapable conclusion. Mitchell Ruble murdered Lieutenant Joe Clark in an act of calculated revenge. The defense tries. They argue about the reliability of 30-year-old testimony. They question the chain of custody on the weapon. They suggest alternative theories, other suspects, reasonable doubt. But the jury sees through it. They see what the cold case unit saw, a trained killer who used his military skills to execute a man who dared to hold him accountable. A cop who went rogue. A veteran who brought the violence of Vietnam home and unleashed it on one of his own. The verdict: guilty. Mitchell Ruble is convicted of murder. Decades too late. But justice, as they say, is still justice, even when it's delayed. The sentence means Ruble will die in prison. There's no parole for murder. No second chances for taking a life with such cold precision. He's led away in handcuffs, and for the first time in 33 years, Patricia Clark can sleep knowing that her husband's killer is behind bars. But let's talk about what justice really means. 33 years. That's more than half a lifetime. Patricia Clark spent 33 years as a widow. 33 years of anniversaries without her husband. Holidays. Grandchildren he never met. Life milestones he never witnessed. You can't give that back. No verdict erases that pain. No prison sentence resurrects the dead. Joe Clark was 41 when he died. He had decades ahead of him. Career advancement, retirement, the simple joy of growing old with the woman he loved. All of that was stolen in a single explosion on a February night because Mitchell Ruble's ego couldn't survive being fired. And here's the bitter truth. Ruble got 33 years of freedom that Joe Clark never got. 33 years of sunrises. Of meals with family. Of sleeping in his own bed. Of living a life, even as the family he destroyed struggled to rebuild theirs. Is that justice? Or is it just the best approximation of justice that a broken system can provide? This case reveals something uncomfortable about law enforcement culture. The blue wall of silence. The reluctance to investigate one of your own. The initial resistance to even considering that a fellow officer, a veteran, a brother in arms, could be capable of murder. For years, investigators looked everywhere except within the department. They chased drug dealers and street criminals while the killer was someone who'd worn the same badge, sat in the same briefing rooms, maybe even attended Joe Clark's funeral with tears in his eyes and murder in his heart. How many other cases go unsolved because we can't imagine that the wolf is already inside the walls? Mitchell Ruble exploited that trust. He counted on his fellow officers looking past him. And for 30 years, that calculation paid off. It's a sobering reminder that badges don't make saints. That military service doesn't guarantee moral character. That the same training that makes someone an effective soldier or cop can also make them an effective killer. And when those two sides collide, when the warrior turns on the tribe, the destruction is catastrophic. Patricia Clark's strength. Let's end by honoring the woman who waited 33 years for justice. Patricia Clark didn't remarry. Didn't move away. Didn't let grief or anger consume her into bitterness. She became an advocate for victims' families, for cold case investigations, for never giving up on the belief that truth eventually surfaces. Joe always believed in justice, she said after the verdict. He believed that if you did the right thing, even when it was hard, justice would prevail. It took 33 years, but he was right. That's the kind of strength that doesn't make headlines. The quiet courage of waking up every day for 3 decades knowing your husband's killer is free. Of seeing the case file gather dust. Of watching investigators retire. Of wondering if you'll die before you ever see justice. But Patricia Clark lived to see it. Lived to watch Mitchell Ruble convicted. Lived to know that her husband's murder finally had an answer. This case became a blueprint for the Washington County Sheriff's Cold Case Unit. It proved that time doesn't erase evidence. It just requires different eyes to see it. That technology can breathe new life into old investigations. That witnesses who won't talk today might talk tomorrow, next year, or 3 decades later when the weight of silence finally breaks them. It proved that cold cases aren't unsolvable, they're just unsolved. Yet, since closing the Clark case, the unit has reopened dozens of investigations, some dating back 50 years. Each one representing a family still waiting, still wondering, still hoping that someone somewhere still cares enough to find the truth. Because that's what justice is, caring enough to keep looking when everyone else has moved on. Before we close, I need to ask something of you. If this story moved you, if you believe in the power of never giving up, of fighting for justice no matter how long it takes, then do something for me right now. Subscribe to this channel. Click that notification bell so you never miss another story like this one. But more importantly, share this video. Share it with someone who believes cold cases don't get solved. Share it with someone who's lost faith in the system. Share it with someone who needs to hear that truth can wait decades, but it will arrive eventually. Your share might be what brings closure to another family still waiting for their own Mitchell Ruble to be caught. The explosion that killed Lieutenant Joe Clark on that February night in 1981 echoed for 33 years. It echoed through Patricia's lonely house, through the frustration of investigators who couldn't solve it, through Todd Smith's guilty conscience, through Mitchell Ruble's arrogant certainty that he'd gotten away with murder. But echoes eventually fade. And when they do, sometimes, just sometimes, they're replaced by the sound of handcuffs clicking closed, the sound of a verdict being read, the sound of justice, delayed but not denied. Joe Clark was a lieutenant who believed in doing the right thing, even when it cost him everything. Mitchell Ruble was a soldier who forgot what he was supposed to be fighting for. And Patricia Clark was a woman who proved that strength isn't about moving on, it's about never giving up. 33 years. One explosion. One truth. And finally, justice. Rest in peace, Lieutenant. Your brothers and sisters in blue never stopped looking.